Hi, my name is Heather Shaw, and I was the PI on our SPRITE funded project, building a minimum viable digital identity from digital footprints. And in our 3-month project, we really wanted to outline our vision for how digital identities could work in the future. In particular, we were curious to see if digital identities that were built using digital footprint data could be used instead of passports and birth certificates, but be considered as trustworthy. And when reviewing over the literature, we came up with what's called a minimum viable digital identity approach. And the idea behind this is, every person has a huge mountain of digital footprint data that's now associated with them. But we might not necessarily need all of those digital footprints to be able to infer identity accurately. So the idea of a minimum viable digital identity approach is understanding, what's the least amount of digital footprints that are required in order to make a trustworthy identity. And of course, that has its own privacy and security things attached to it. Equally, we were looking at the needs of vulnerable groups, because those who are likely to benefit the most from having a digital identity in absence of a passport or birth certificate are migrants and refugees. And also we thought that if we can make a digital identity that's suitable for these groups who might have very limited digital footprint data, then it's likely that it would work for the wider population as well. So again, we were interested in what digital footprint data could be used to create an identity for citizens across the globe. And also we considered that a digital ID system would need to change dependent on user needs. The data that can be collected, especially as future technology changes, we might be collecting different digital footprints from people. But also we spoke a lot about the authentication context and how different digital footprints might help us infer different parts of someone's identity, and how this might help narrow down what digital footprints are needed for different contexts. We kind of wanted to summarize today our outcome of our narrative review. And it's been a genuine kind of group project. We've all kind of tapped into it and done an interdisciplinary review spanning across computer science and psychology. And to begin with, we wanted to understand what digital footprint data was associated with migrants and refugees. So we were looking at different types of refugees and migrants and what digital data they would be generating as part of their journey. For instance, an economic refugee might be making money transfers back home, and this would leave a particular digital footprint in terms of the transactions they were making, but also they might install certain banking applications that allow for those transactions. You might have persecution refugees who were documenting their persecution and collecting evidence via photos and videos. And again, these are all different types of digital footprint data that would be associated with them. And conflict and war refugees, they might be accessing information about safe zones and subsequently travel into these zones. And they could be using, Google Maps, which would then generate GPS locations. So it was good to see what types of digital footprint data could be used to form their digital identity. And also, we were kind of mapping the different types of digital footprints that were collected. For example, some digital footprints were passively generated, whilst others were actively generated. And what we mean by this is that passively generated digital footprints are those that don't require user engagement. And this might include just their browsing history, as they're naturally browsing, metadata is being collected without them necessarily doing anything. Whereas actively generated digital footprints are those that users voluntarily generate, such as photos and posts that are made online. Also, we can see that digital footprints are either self-generated or other-generated. And what we mean by this is, other-generated digital footprints are those created by organizations. So some organizations might create a refugee profile, for instance, and input someone's details and build that up for them. Whereas users might create their own digital footprints if they are making online accounts. And also we considered these kind of two interfaces in which digital footprints are being created. So the online interface refers to web-based services and digital footprints that are created through accessing them, such as websites. And the physical interface is kind of talking more about Internet of Things technology that people are interacting with that are network connected. And our review showed that web-based services are still the majority interface in which people are generating digital footprints. And these are many online services such as commerce, finance, and social networks, which rely on apps and things. The Internet of Things interface is more commonly adopted by use cases such as smart transport or government services, where they collect more information such as photos, voices, and body activities. So the Internet of Things devices are typically used more for biometric data. And again, we also find that digital footprints, in the most part, are passively generated. And again, this means that we can collect more digital footprints because it doesn't require user engagement. So we can rock up quite a lot of digital footprints on an individual. However, passively generated digital footprints does have a privacy consideration, especially if people are unaware that digital footprints are being generated on them when they're accessing certain websites, etc. So we were also interested in understanding the unique needs of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers when creating a digital identity for them. And we reviewed a particular case study, such as Jordan Satari camp refugee. And this opened in 2012 and is still home to about 80,000 refugees. And the majority of refugees who went there arrived with nothing but the clothes on their back. They didn't have any personal savings, documents, or any sort of social capital. And we really needed to, or they needed to, record information on them to help them get direct needs such as food, water, and medicine, and also shelter. There was also security concerns with potential extremists and different political factions, or people that might be of interest to external political groups in these refugee camps. And the longer that these refugees stayed in the camps, then different data was needed due to evolving needs in healthcare, education, and older people requiring services. And again, longer term employment capability needs also emerged as an important data collection activity. And also the Jordan government needed information so in order to claim things like the UNHCR cash assistance and World Food Programme vouchers, etc., to provide medical support. So again, they were collecting all this different amount of data on these individuals. But in short, the needs evolved from supporting a disaster relief in these refugee camps to supporting a growing and functioning town community as people stayed there for longer periods of time. So the key takeaways from us reviewing the refugee use case is what essentially is the minimum viable requirements for our digital ID. And essentially, we require a huge range of situations from individuals with no digital data to those with extensive digital records. So something will only be minimum viable if it can cater for these two different groups of individuals. And in terms of privacy and collecting digital data, in these immediate emergency situations, we might prioritize other things over privacy. But in the longer term, we should place greater emphasis on privacy issues. Because individuals need security, this means that they must disclose some of their private information in order to afford this security. Again, this digital data is now being used extensively to provide access to other services such as food and healthcare. And I guess there are evolving needs amongst both refugees and stakeholders that our digital identity would need to cater for. We were also considering the human factor side of identity in our review and decided that we think that a minimum viable digital identity needs to be adaptive based on the authentication context. And this is because people naturally adapt what information they share online to help manage their identities. So digital identity from a social science perspective incorporates how people express themselves and interact with digital environments. And people actively construct their identities online by choosing what content to put on their social media sites. But they also self-censorship, so they don't put certain things on certain web pages to help manage other people's impressions of themselves. And we can consider how different platforms might invoke different audiences, such as LinkedIn is a professional audience, whereas you might have family on somewhere like Facebook. So because these different technologies have different audiences and serve different purposes, you would share certain things on one versus the other. So you're unlikely to show your holiday pictures, for instance, on LinkedIn, as that wouldn't be appropriate, versus you might put them on Facebook, etc. So this teaches us that information sharing during verification procedures should be context dependent and only reveal certain parts of someone's identity that is relevant to the situation at hand, as this aligns more with how people naturally manage their identities. For example, when applying for a job, the parts of identity which are salient to a person are their past job roles and their responsibilities, so their professional identity. And we only really need information related to that. And this is very different to verifying your identity when purchasing alcohol, as in this case, you would need age-related information. And again, if you're looking at something like age versus your professional identity, these are likely linked to different digital footprints. So you might be able to look at LinkedIn to find information on someone's professional identity, but then to find out information about age, this might come from a different digital footprint. Okay. And also, we wanted to see how adopting a minimum viable digital identity approach could improve existing digital ID systems and help reduce inequalities. And we looked at the fact that many digital identities at the moment are using biometric data. There'll be some sort of digital onboarding where people will be asked to put in their date of birth and their details. And then they'll take a QR code to a biometric data center, which will then scan their fingerprints, their face, and do iris scans. The issue with these is that they might not work for the marginalized minority who experience inequalities when an identification scheme doesn't work for them. So the Aadhaar scheme, which is India's biometric ID system, led to quite a high level of exclusion due to a failure of verification for lots of people. And in some states, it was up to 49%. The verification wasn't working properly. And this meant that people weren't being able to access vital food parcels that they needed. And there's things like facial recognition is often worse for women and suffers from the other race effect. So if you've trained algorithms on European faces, then they're going to be better at identifying and verifying European faces than other faces. And also we have to ensure that surveillance systems are not used to support human rights violations and those who are fleeing persecution, because biometric information cannot be readily changed. If it's placed in the wrong hands, then it can be used to abuse individuals. So we were considering how it might not be necessary to use biometrics in contexts such as getting food parcels and vital services. You could use, for example, a functional ID that you get an e-wallet on somebody's phone, and this could log access to support services such as food parcel transactions, and it just logs what that individual has received in terms of aid. And there are also new and emerging behavioral biometrics, which can verify somebody based on the way they're using their smartphones. So the patterns in app use, for instance. And this could ensure the e-wallet becomes unavailable if the phone is lost or stolen. And I guess the key message here is that they are potential alternatives to biometrics, which use digital footprint data. And they might be more appropriate for public distribution systems, which supply basic needs. We've also considered social networks and how this can infer who a person is. especially in refugees that have come from communities with a community leader. They may be able to help identify an individual. So in terms of what's yet to be done, we want to build a conceptual model for minimum viable digital identity, which includes understanding the identification context, such as trying to get a job versus identifying someone's age, for instance, and then mapping out the appropriate facets of identity that are needed for that particular authentication context, and then looking at what digital footprint data can infer these different facets of identity. But equally, in terms of the digital footprint data, to establish trust, we need to ensure that there's a level of confidence with that digital data. And we've spoken a lot about understanding the sell-by date of data. So when a digital footprint is no longer relevant to form a digital identity. And also we want to explore how a combination of different digital footprints can infer different levels of trust. And this is similar to how the current government do and assess the confidence of someone's identity profiles. For example, you can give a piece of digital data or digital footprint data a score of 1 if it has somebody's name attached to it, their date of birth or their identity. And this is in contrast to a score of 4, which might include biometric information. So in sum, I hope I've kind of sold the idea that if you're creating a digital identity for somebody, that we should follow these 4 principles. And this is what we believe the future of digital identity to entail. So thank you.